Well, a wise man once said, "New year, new me." Same me though. And in that vein, we're back with more things to talk about here. I feel like last year, 2024, was a big year for music. And so we, as such, talked a lot of music on the podcast. But that's not to say there weren't great movies also and great cinematic moments out there. And so we had to decide to come back, do an episode on some of the biggest movie moments of last year, particularly towards the end of the year. We had the great saga between Wicked and Gladiator II. I feel like every few years there's these kind of just complete polar opposite films that come out almost at the same time that end up doing wonders and being both so well respected.
Right. Absolutely.
Like you've got the La La Land, Hacksaw Ridge phenomenon a few years ago, Barbenheimer last year, well, 2 years ago now. And then just freshly off of that, we have the Gladiator Wicked situation.
I like it.
So we're going to sit here, talk about those. Okay. But obviously, we don't know what we're doing.
Ever.
Never.
No.
So we had to enlist the help of someone much wiser than us, which isn't saying much, but it does say something. It does say something. And so we have the great, the one, the only, the wise Jonah Park. He's back. He's back. 2 weeks in a row. 2 weeks in a row. 2 weeks in a row. We're so glad he's here.
How y'all doing?
Chilling.
We're doing great. I don't know about anybody listening to this, if they're listening to our podcast, but we're doing good. Jonah's here to talk some Wicked with us before we move into a little bit of a discussion on Gladiator. Prior to us really getting into the nitty-gritty of this movie, if we were to call this a little spoiler-free review segment here, just generally, how's everybody feeling about the film? What are we liking? What kind of aspects stood out to us? Do we feel like it's a movie worth seeing? Jonah, I mean, start us off here.
Yeah, I mean, you got some skeptical casting choices by yours truly. I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay. Being someone who did get to see the play, now of course it's not I didn't go to Broadway and see. It was a Las Vegas showing, so whatever you picture when I said, "Oh, it's a Las Vegas play," probably pretty accurate.
Yeah.
But being as someone who's seen the play, and knows the characters well, knows who originally played these characters and really what they brought to the role. Ariana Grande, to me, didn't seem like the greatest choice. I probably would have gone with a Dove Cameron, who has shown countless times to play a role similar to that with excellence. But then you've got this Cynthia Erivo playing the Wicked Witch, and I wasn't really familiar, but I did see some clips of her singing. Incredible vocal range.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at the trailers. I'm like, okay, trying to get kind of a vibe of what's going. Little did I know this would become a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, everybody's really hyped out right now. This is too much. I got to go see this for myself. So I sat down in the theaters. I'm all cynical. I'm like, screw this, girly play, whatever.
Yeah.
And I walk away, and I'm like, all right, look, I have not had something affect me in that way in such a long time.
Right.
It's the chokehold that movie has on me and my family is uncalled for.
Wow.
I must say. Yeah. I saw this movie in November, and I still, in January, cannot get that soundtrack out of my head.
Yeah.
Right.
And just reliving the moments, and I think it was great. If I had to sum it up, I think it was phenomenal. It really did stay true to the source material. and I was blown away by all the performances, including Ariana Grande. Really big. That was the biggest surprise for me, was her portrayal of the character. Incredible, amazing. Cynthia Erivo obviously taking that role and just running with it. And I would say if you get the chance to go see it in theaters, highly recommend doing so. Or even if you just have free time at home whenever it hits streaming, definitely give it a shot.
Yeah.
So
J-Mac and I saw this this last week in theaters.
Oh, wow.
I will have to agree with you, like, particularly on going into it feeling pretty skeptical. And for me, the main reason I was really skeptical going into it is not like anything that I had against like the play or anything like that. I'll say right now, which will probably be a good preface, I haven't seen the play or read the book, so like this was all new material to me, seeing it on the screen. And so that does play a part in my review. So like my whole conversation that I'm about to have here has like a major asterisk. Like if you know, this whole second part could change everything that I have to say about this movie. I'm not going to lie to you guys. But particularly for me, the reason I was really hesitant going into it was the press run for the movie was like, it really got on my nerves really quick. Like, they're like, hey, so they built this train from scratch like to make it in the movie. Like, tell us about that. And Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo are just like, oh my gosh. And they just like start sobbing, looking at each other. It's so beautiful. Like, this was such a life-changing moment on the set. And I'm like, okay, hold on, guys. Like let's slow down just a little bit. Okay, here.
They were like, hey, I heard one day they catered like pigs in a blanket on set. What was that? Was that true? And they're like, oh my god, pigs in a blanket. It's like, bro.
Exactly. So yeah, like based on the press run, I was like, okay, this is too much. Like, I have no idea what I'm getting myself into. This is going to be so over the top and dramatic. But I'll agree with you. I was very pleasantly surprised going in there, sitting through it, enjoying a lot of what I saw on there. I would agree, definitely a movie worth seeing, even if you're someone like me who's just been like, it's gotten on your nerves how much people are talking about it and all that kind of stuff. Still definitely worth a shot. It's a good film. It's enjoyable. So
this is going to be a cool episode just because all three of us have had very different perspectives from the jump. So with me, I love Wicked, like always have, but I haven't seen the play. Didn't know there was a book until 25 seconds ago for when you said
right.
But my mom was huge into Wicked. She loves it, and so she raised us on just the soundtrack. I don't know why we never got around to watching anything, but the soundtrack, I just have a lot of really good core memories with my family, like listening to those songs and just a vibe. And so then they bring it up like, oh, we're doing a movie. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm stoked. I can finally like see what this is about, because I have no idea the premise of this movie other than it's a Wicked Witch of the West origin story. That's really all I understand. Right. So going into this movie, very curious, very excited, walked away understanding the soundtrack so much more. Because if you just listen to the soundtrack, like, yeah, this isn't a spoiler. Like, that there's like talking animals, like, I don't understand that from the soundtrack. Right. So like watching it just makes everything a lot more full. And so I was excited for it. I've loved it. Came out of it. Great movie. Loved it.
There you go.
Yeah.
I mean, well said. I think all around, it's we're all in consensus, like, but coming from different perspectives, like J-Mac said. So I'm curious to get into the details of things here now, and I don't know how much we'll get into as far as spoilers, but for anybody listening that hasn't seen it, wants to cut this off now and then come back to the episode after you've seen all of the movie in its entirety, here's your warning officially. But starting off, just discussing the plot of the film a little bit. I'll go first because I feel like I had the least exposure to this going into this. J Max
Sure.
at least heard the soundtrack. Jonah's seen the play. The Las Vegas version. Who knows what that means? I feel like I have an idea. But anyways, for me, the plot was interesting for sure. It was I guess trying to think of a good word to use. I'll say original idea, kind of to take these two well-known characters from the Wizard of Oz and explore how they got to where they were, their journey through kind of being friends and enemies and all of that kind of stuff is certainly an interesting avenue to take. What I will say though, for me, inevitably when I'm watching movies, what I come back to with plot material is how much does the plot stand out to me as a point of the movie. And with this particularly, and again, this is only the first part, so maybe this is setting up a lot of what we're getting into in the second part. I did feel like there wasn't anything too standoutish about the plot that wasn't kind of an idea that I hadn't seen done before in other things. And that's not to say that it's bad. I did give the plot a 7, so respectable. It was fun to watch. It was intriguing. But it was something that just wasn't the most compelling aspect of the movie to me.
Yeah. Oh, I'm up.
Yeah, for sure.
Jonah's up.
No.
I'm up.
Bring it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, did you give it its rating?
I gave it a 7.
Okay. So, I gave it an 8. I agree with you. It's original in the sense of, like you said, just bringing these characters that we just know of from The Wizard of Oz, diving into their story. It doesn't feel like forced or anything like previous movies that we've talked about. Go check out those episodes. And it's a very simple plot. Actually, let me say it like this. It's a very deep plot with very simple underlinings. And when I say that, it's not even about like Glenda and Elphaba. Like in the beginning it's this petty, like end of high school kind of era drama. Like it's popular girl versus the one who gets bullied. That's simple enough. Yeah. But then it's Elphaba against the government in Munchkinland? Sure.
Yeah.
And so
right.
It was just cool to see that it starts off so simple and petty with these two girls just in school kind of taking jabs at each other and then making it into something bigger and something where they both stand on what they believe into this we got to part ways, but in the end, like, I hope whatever you're looking for you find. I hope you're happy. Like, that's how it is. So I like the progression of the plot, so I gave it an 8.
Before we go over to you, Jonah, I will say I agree with a big point that J Mac made, that the plot is simple, but it's really the underlying aspects of the plot that make it a compelling story. Because if you just go with that kind of original feeling that the plot gives you of this conflict between the characters, it's essentially Fantasyland High School Musical. Is really where you are. I mean, even the imagery of like Pink Sharpay showing up first day, like that's immediately what I thought of, and then I was like, oh, okay, we're actually going somewhere with this once things started moving. So I just agree. I think that's an important point to make.
Yeah, that is that's scary accurate.
Yeah,
actually, that's yeah. I rewatched an episode of Pop Culture Roundup where Ryder, you made a connection between the Puss in Boots universe and the Spider-Verse universe in terms of their villains. And I remember in that moment being like, no, that's not accurate. And then I started thinking about it more. I was like, no, actually, that's a scary accurate. And I'm feeling the exact same emotions right now as you just made that connection. So there's that's sad. Yeah. So I mean, I rated the plot an 8. I think because me and my wife were so hooked on Wicked that we were like, okay, when's part 2 coming out? So we had to go back and watch the original Wizard of Oz, and it didn't hit that same addiction that we were feeling for Wicked. But it was interesting. And one thing I will say is I think Wicked takes some pretty big detours in terms of what happens in the Wizard of Oz film and what Wicked is setting up. I know how the whole thing ends, and so I'm trying to be sparing with this, but every character except for Dorothy from the Wizard of Oz has made an appearance in Wicked Part 1.
Okay.
And they're not in their final form yet.
Right.
But there's some massive changes to that. But I think I can respect that because they are telling their own original story. And you got to keep in mind too, when this original play was originally like made and put out there, this was, I think, late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
So at the time, a villain origin story that makes the villain actually not the bad guy was pretty revolutionary for the time. But now we're living in, the 2020s. Yeah. There's been a lot of films that have really kind of taken that concept and really stretched it out. So to us, I can agree that seems very repetitive. But for the time, I mean, it was pretty revolutionary. Yeah. And that's a great analysis, J-Mac. I didn't even realize like how much they take this very simple plot and then broaden it to like, okay, crap, we're dealing with a lot of corruption, and it was just high school for just a second, and now, and it was like, Glinda likes this boy, but I like him too, so what are we gonna do about that? And then it's like, corruption, though, how you feel about that, Elphaba? And she's like, oh, snap. My entire life is a lie. Yeah. And then it's like, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
I am excited about it. I think the plot, solid. The writing's really good. It's one thing I really do love, and I know I keep talking. This is my last point.
You're good.
One thing I really love is in one of the first songs where Elphaba is singing about how she's going to meet the wizard.
Great song.
She's setting up a lot of allusions to what's going to happen next. And she's not wrong, but she's also not seeing the full picture. Yeah. She's like, there's going to be a parade in all of Oz just for me. And it's like, yeah, that's going to happen. But it's because everybody hates you so much and you're the villain of the story. Yeah. So I think it's cool because there's a lot of different things that happen in that are setting up future stuff. And I don't know if that's a testament to the writing or the plot or both. I don't know. But I enjoyed that a lot because it's like they're really clever with what they're giving you, I feel like. So, I rated it an 8.
Yeah. Just to wrap up the plot segment here, if I were to boil down the plot of the movie into just a short anecdote here, it's essentially there's about a 20-second clip in Jim Carrey's Grinch when he's kind of terrorizing Whoville, and he walks outside and he goes and he like says taxi, and he's trying to flag down a taxi and it just drives past him and he goes, "It's because I'm green, isn't it?" And that's essentially the plot of the movie, and I totally say that jokingly, but that really is the initial introduction that you kind of get to the movie there. Yep. But to move into the next section here and talking about the kind of writing aspects of the movie, the dialogue, the soundtrack writing, all that kind of stuff. This was my highest category for the movie. I gave it a 9. I really, really liked the way the movie was written. And I, again, like, I haven't seen the play. I don't know how much of it was borrowed from the play or the book, but I imagine that there's definitely some direct draws for a lot of those major scenes because they feel very Broadway-like in the way that they're executed in the film. And I really, really liked that aspect of it because they were just witty, they were funny, they hit at the right time. They were also compelling and interesting when they needed to be and made you think about it, where you're kind of looking back, like you said, Jonah, on a big moment like that, and you're like, oh, wow, like they told us this whole thing. We just didn't realize the direction that it was going. So I really liked a lot of the writing aspects. The original songwriting was really great for the Broadway stuff that they pulled over. So I really enjoyed that aspect of the movie.
So I gave it a 7. I agree with just about everything that you said. I think for me, it started coming down to the writing for like a character here and there. Like, did I love what like the prince did? There were quite a few moments where I was just like over it, and I was like, all right, you sound dumb, you look dumb, you act dumb. I don't know if it's because you're supposed to or if I just don't like you. And then so there were a couple characters like that where I was just like, like whatever. And so that's where it took a big hit. But I basically agree with. I think the suspense was great. I think there were some solid comedic parts. Yeah.
See, I really liked a lot of the writing for the prince, particularly when he first meets Elphaba and she's like, she goes to give him her like normal spiel that she's like, I'm not seasick, and he's like, oh, neither am I. And she's like, I didn't eat grass as a kid. And he's like, oh, well, I did. Like, I thought that was hilarious. Like, that whole interaction was funny.
No, I agree. It's just, I can't pinpoint exactly when it was, but like, he had some good moments.
Yeah.
I just think there were just other moments where I was like, all right, enough from you.
Okay.
Moving on.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I rated it a 9. I think I think the moments with the songwriting is very clever. There are some moments though, and they get a pass because this is a fantasy world and whatever. But in the songs, they make up way too many words that are not real just so they can get out of a rhyme scheme.
Yeah.
Like I'm trying to think. There's one where it's like disgusting fiable or something like that, and it's like, bro, like I get it, but it's like every time they came up with I don't know what rhymes with this, and they're like, oh, let's make up a word, and then they jumble a bunch of words together.
Eminem's been doing that for 20 years. That's okay.
Not wrong.
Eminem's like, I got 40 billion rhymes for orange. I got orange, and it's like, no, that's not a word, Eminem.
Yeah,
you can't use that word.
And
That's fake.
Post.
But yeah, I think it's very clever. I think I'm kind of honing in my writing more towards the songwriting.
Yeah.
The script is, I mean, again, this is pre-established material, so it's like you can kind of pull from what you need to and then kind of leave out what you don't. But I think it kind of it gives you the progression of events very well. It doesn't feel like they're rushing things. It also doesn't feel like they're kind of slowing things down either. I feel like the pacing's good. The characters and how they interact feels natural, and like there is that chemistry between them all. And yeah, I mean, I feel really great about this in a time where like there's so many movies that are rushing through events and like that just they don't make sense. And why are we doing what do you why? It's like now it's like, okay, no, cool, this makes sense. Everything that's happening is like clear, concise. You're not rushing it. You're developing it well.
Yeah.
So I gave it a 9.
For sure. I think it's definitely one of the stronger points of the movie. And then to move into another aspect that I know a lot of people are talking about and that I also really enjoyed here, the visuals, how it appeared on film. I thought it was, in terms of the cinematography, it was really stunning. Like, to see the way they did a lot of things, as far as like the set design, it looked fantastic. I thought the costumes all looked great. Makeup, hairstyling, all that stuff was just really well done. And then even more specifically looking at like the camera work, the editing was one thing that I was really, as I was watching it, I found myself really drawn to those aspects, because while I haven't seen the play, I can see aspects that would fit into the play, and those are just things that you don't have in a play. Every frame in a play is the same. You're seeing the same perspective of the set every time there's a scene, and then there's obviously no editing other than transitions that move you to another scene in a musical or in a play. And so seeing those aspects, I really liked the way they incorporated those things to give you more of a perspective of the emotion of the characters, where you could kind of more clearly see those details, with a lot of the close-ups and all those kinds of things, the way the camera moved between people to kind of see how they were reacting to different things, I really enjoyed. And then obviously the color composition was great. I really liked that aspect of it. One of the shots that's kind of just keeps coming to my mind when I think of that is early on in their rooming together, Elphaba and Glinda, when Elphaba's laying on her back and she has this color palette of her green face on half the side, and then all of the pink from Glinda's side of the room is reflecting on her face in that kind of two-tone look. It was just really, really cool. I think it really added to scenes when you were feeling how the colors impacted things around them, if that makes sense. Like, when Glinda's trying to help Elphaba become popular, and then she goes off, and then Glinda comes into the hallway, but everything turns pink. Like, it doesn't start off that way, but the way it's lit, everything turns pink. And it was like a really cool way to see the scene transform as things were progressing. But what I will say is, one of the places where I felt like it did lack a little bit was in some of the CGI aspects, which was interesting to me, because if you weren't going to do a play, that's the most major thing you can do to like make scenes bigger and more dramatic and more interesting, is like you have all this editing and technology access to add these computer generated things. And to me, those were like the least appealing visual scenes at times. And so I did give the visuals an 8 just because of that aspect right there.
Dude, I don't like how you break down colors every time now, ever since La La Land.
First of all,
No,
the colors in La La Land are fantastic.
Look, you pissed me off with the colors in La La Land, and now you're bringing up colors again. I don't like that you're viewing colors like that. It's just too much. I don't have to think about things like that. Next time you're going to be talking about...
Jonah's going to back me up. I've got a feeling.
They're going to move their fingers. You're like, oh, that means something. No, I'm just kidding. I just can't do that, and so I'm a little jealous.
Oh, my God.
I thought this was one of my higher categories. I gave it a 9. I agree with basically everything you said, minus colors, for obvious reasons. But I think the coolest parts of it was the camera shots, the camera angles. One of the ones that comes to my mind, 2 of them actually, is when they're dancing in the library and they're getting like the spinning bookshelves and doing that whole fiasco. I think they handled that very well. But then also at the end of the movie, where Elphaba is on the broom and is just doing all these crazy things, and I just thought it looked dope. It's freaking cool. Yeah.
Enough said.
Exactly. I thought the school itself was cool. I don't know. I really like the design of the actual school. I like the costumes. There were I'll say this. There were a couple moments where I did notice color, mainly just the little pink flower in her hair, but she also had to say, "Hey, the pink looks really good on your green." And then I thought about oh wow, you're kind of right.
Yeah. The seed's been planted. You're gonna start seeing it now.
Anyway, so basically just piggybacking, I did CGI was really the only thing that I saw a problem was. It just didn't take a huge knock for me as it did to you.
Yeah. Yeah, so wait, Ryder, what was your score
I gave it
on
an 8.
Visuals?
An 8, yeah.
You gave it an 8? Okay. Yeah, so originally, and this is before I'm hearing Ryder's take and Jaden's take, I gave it a 7.
Oh.
Now, I
Womp womp.
completely forgot about, I know, I completely forgot about how a lot of the sets were like physically built
Yeah.
out and trying to minimize green screen and all that kind of jazz. And I think there is something to be said about that. I can respect that from a creative standpoint on actually caring about like and putting effort into creating something that's actually believable instead of just resulting to green screen or
Right.
whatever. And for me, one of the things that visually stood out the most to me was that the wizard's head was there was no CGI used at all. That was just straight up puppeteering
Yeah.
on a massive level. Huge respect because that did look like CGI, but if you pay close attention, you're noticing it's like, oh wait, no, that is actually like someone is puppeteering that thing, and it's making it look very realistic and very cool. Why I had it at a 7 was exactly Ryder's point of CGI being incredibly noticeable.
Yeah.
Particularly, I'll say the blue monkeys were really bad
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yep.
The goat professor I thought was really great. I think some of the other animal characters that they brought in, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, were pretty decent. It was just those like the servant monkey characters were not. I mean, it was really obvious. And again, like Ryder was saying, that's the one thing you have to differentiate between a Broadway play and a film.
Yeah.
And if you're going to use that, I mean, amplify the Broadway play in that regard. I didn't really feel like they did. So I'm gonna put it back up to an 8 because I do have a lot of respect for set design. But when I think of like a 10 out of 10 on the visual scale, I'm thinking of a film like Dune.
Yeah.
Where they are really, really focused on visuals. And color grading scale, I think there are some moments like Ryder that you're saying that are definitely like they are very particular with the colors they're choosing. It's just, for me, it wasn't enough for me to really take a great notice and be
Right.
like, wow, I am blown away. So I think an 8 to me seems like a fair score.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's certainly not La La Land when we're talking colors.
That you might have ruined that movie for me and that experience. I hated just. Okay, real quick. We're watching La La
Sure.
Land, and before we start, he pauses the movie as we're about to start. He goes, "The colors mean something. Think about that. Play." And I'm just sitting there like, "What do you mean?" And then every like 20 minutes, he'd look over. Have you figured out what the colors mean yet? No, and now I'm rethinking about it. So it's pissing me off. Anyways.
It's got good color scheme in that movie. What can I say?
It's great.
Moving from the audio, or from the visuals, into the audio here. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about the soundtrack, but going more specifically into the sound of said soundtrack, the vocal performances, if you will, the mixing, all that good stuff. I did give this section an 8. I thought it sounded great as far as musicals go. Both of their vocal talents, I felt like, were well used. Jonah, like you said, for me seeing Ariana Grande, I was like, okay, like, we'll see how this goes. I mean, I know she's got crazy vocal range, so that was like the one area that kind of gave me like a little bit of hope. Like, okay, she's gonna be able to probably do whatever they ask her to vocally. But I thought audio-wise, it sounded pretty great. There were a few moments where I just didn't love how things overall came across or sounded to me personally. It was kind of more of a personal preference on that front. But I thought the soundtrack was pretty well done. I did like that it added to the story as you're kind of listening and going through. I gave it an 8 because of those kinds of things, but overall I did think it was an enjoyable aspect.
Valid. It was almost a 10 for me. It was only a 9. This is the only reason. but I don't think that they did Popular, like the song Popular. I don't think they did it as much justice as the original song. I thought there was a little bit too much conversing throughout the song, and like a little bit more dramatic when they were conversing. And it's like, all right, well, and that's probably just personal preference, but I don't know. It rubbed me the wrong way, and so I knocked it. Other than that, I thought everything was great. I'm usually not one to hear like the actual scorecard, not just the soundtrack, but like the score of a movie. But this one was just so prominent and it just kind of like built an emotion, whether it was suspense or this like ominous when they're like in the forest or like whatever was going on. Like I actually felt like emotion with each one of the tracks, and I just thought everything with the mixing sounded good. Like you said, their vocal mix, great. All of the songs, loved them all besides Popular. So gave it a 9.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, if we're talking audio, performances as singers were flawless. The only person, and I'll get into this later, that I think I cannot sing is Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to say that.
100%.
But I will get into his performance later.
Yeah. That's where it takes
musical
a hit for
composition.
Me as well.
yeah. Musical composition is great. Again, it's not necessarily something they are taking a lot from the original.
Sure.
And it's the same people who composed and wrote from the play
Right.
are back now modernizing these songs. I did appreciate that. I think there's some instrumentation choices that they chose that felt very like 90s that I wasn't appreciative of. But if it's a creative choice to invoke that like nostalgia feel of the original, I can respect that. Just not a personal preference that I liked. So yeah, performances great, composition great. They really know how to build up these big moments, like the final vocal run in Defying Gravity. They're like building up with the toms, and you're getting goosebumps.
Yeah.
And then she does it, and it's crazy. Where this category takes a big hit for me is its mixing. It's trash. Oh. And
not me saying 5 seconds ago that I thought it was great.
Different strokes.
So the biggest part is their auto-tune takes a massive hit for me. It's enough to where it can at times ruin the raw natural talent of these performers. Like Ariana Grande is phenomenal. Again, going back to the amazing performances, the notes she's hitting in this entire movie should not be able to be hit by any human being on planet Earth. Yeah. I mean, and I walked into this movie completely forgetting her vocal range, and I'm like, it's Ariana Grande, she's probably going to give some breathy vocals like she does on her pop records. And then I'm like, oh, snap, she's an opera singer.
She's
okay,
like that.
That's nuts. She's her, basically. But it's the auto-tune in certain moments, in certain songs, and where they're taking... I know this as a producer, they are literally taking notes and, like, in Logic or whatever program they're using and dragging them up to where they need to be. So it's going to warp your vocal, and it's the most apparent person that this is so prevalent is with Jeff Goldblum. I don't know if you know this. Well, okay, Sentimental Man, the one where he's singing about how he wants to be a father and stuff. When he hits that high note, you can hear it. It's so ugly, dude. It is so gross. It's like, get it out of here. I don't know if you know this, but you know the song where the mayor's wife is cheating on him with the other dude? Yeah. That's the Wizard. And so it's Jeff Goldblum's voice singing that part. And so when it is the so it, again, that's gonna play like that has huge implications on the plot. Whatever. But when he does the have another little drink or whatever,
Yeah.
it's you listen back to it because it is so ugly,
Yeah.
dude. So I rated it a 7. It has nothing to do with vocal performances. It has everything to do with how god awful they did at mixing
Yeah.
those songs. It's garbage. It makes me so mad.
Yeah.
Anyways, so 7.
They're better off at some points just throwing Travis Scott on the vocals and letting that
Dude,
auto-tune do
it
its thing.
sounded like
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just picturing Travis Scott when he falls off the stage at one of his concerts and it goes like with the auto-tune.
Yeah. There's some funny auto-tune clips of that man out there. But
Yeah.
I can respect all of that as well. Jonah, remind me what you rated that one, that category. There.
I gave it a 7.
Okay, yeah. So I mean,
Yeah.
respectable score still for sure. Going into the characters here, this is where I will say that the major asterisk I mentioned at the beginning of like, you know, take what I have to say with a grain of salt because I have no preconceived notions of where this is going. I gave this category a 6 because I really, really did not like where the main characters' arcs were taken from this movie based on the only frame of reference I had, which is The Wizard of Oz. And in seeing The Wizard of Oz, and like it's been a while for me since I've seen that one, but in looking back on it, I think while these characters that we particularly see, like The Wizard of Oz, Glinda, and Elphaba, aren't like the main characters that we're following from the whole story, I think they all still play significant roles in that movie and in the main character's journey in that movie. And I think if you're to even analyze it on a little bit of a deeper level, they kind of represent bigger things for what the plot of that movie and book are trying to convey. If you get to the moral of the story in The Wizard of Oz, and if you don't want spoilers for that, I'm sorry, it's like 70 years old. But really, I feel like the gang that we see there, the filmmakers and the writer of the book want us to see ourselves in that perspective. And so when they're finding out that they had courage all along, they had brains all along, they had a way to get home all along, when they had these things with them all along, I think the creators are trying to tell us that we have that within us. Like, we have what we need within us is kind of the moral there. And I think in order to discover that, these characters play key parts. And the adversity that the Wicked Witch of the West has plays a key part in that, in facing adversity, in facing things that are difficult to you to get there. And then obviously Glinda being the other side of that. So really I say that to say that I have just a little bit of an issue with somebody who's not the original creator of this universe taking those characters and taking them in a direction that the creator may not have intended for them to be taken. And the way I see that is if I were to take Harry Potter and take Voldemort and say, actually, here's the thing, Voldemort just misunderstood, kind of in the right all along. You know, create this whole storyline where it's like Voldemort got put where he is because of Albus Dumbledore, actually. And that's why he's the way he is. And Dumbledore's really the one that you kind of don't like the whole time. And so that's the only issue I really take with this, is that I feel like it may be disingenuous to the original creator of the character's vision for them. And so really the way personally I got over that was just by looking at it as like a completely separate universe, as like almost as if you were to take like an experimental view of the characters. But I say all that to say that that's just the only reason the characters haven't really sat right with me throughout kind of waiting on this. And from what I understand from the book of Wicked, and like I said, I haven't seen the play yet, but there is some development that gets you more true to where they're at. But as it stands from the film right now, after this first part, I am left feeling a little bit puzzled by the creator's direction. And so it's hard because I don't really put that against the filmmakers. They're staying true to the play, which is from the book. So like you're 3 iterations in, like what I again wouldn't hope for them to do is take the musical and then do something different with the movie. Like, and we're so far removed from the original that we're just, not even in the same thing.
Yeah.
But like I said, that's just the only reason it does take a little bit of a knock for me. It was a little bit of that aspect that just hasn't quite sat right with me yet. So I'm looking forward to the second part. Is another thing that I'll say, because I'm curious to see how it develops from there.
What'd you give it?
6.
Cool. So I gave it a 7, but it could also be an 8. I haven't fully decided. I'm not set in stone on the 7, but I don't know. Anyway, so I think I thought everybody did exactly what they were supposed to do, and I think they absolutely killed it. I think Elphaba and Glenda, solid characters. There's great character development between both of them, this relationship that they have, and then they're put into the situation where they don't agree, and then throughout that song, they realize, like, just because we disagree doesn't mean that we can't be happy for each other or hope for the best. So I think throughout the entire movie, absolutely nailed it right on the head, right? There are 3 characters that really just irk my soul. And funny enough, it's not the prince. He didn't make the list. I just don't even care about him. He's just in the wind. So the first character is the ginger.
Ariana Grande's boyfriend.
Yeah, he's stupid. I can't stand him. Yeah. And I feel like what you were saying with his character on not as much of a deep level, I got to see part 2 to see, like, what kind of happens in that situation. But right now, just absolutely think he's a stupid character. And is just a fangirl of Glenda and needs to calm down just like everyone else. Anyways, the other 2 characters that, like, genuinely get on my nerves, because that one's more just kind of, like, funny to me, is I thought they did the professor so awful. I don't think her character was good at all.
Really?
Yeah. Because it's kind of like CGI for me, where it's really hard for me to tell if it's bad CGI unless it's really bad. You know how you're able to, like, know what's going to happen in a movie?
Sure. No, but yeah. I get where you're going with this, is what I'll say.
I'll explain later, because I don't even know how to explain it right now. Anyways, so, like, right when the professor brought up, when the professor got taken away, immediately knew. I was like, okay, so you're evil. Like, you're doing a terrible job hiding this fact that you, like, have a whole agenda to yourself. Like, you just want her powers for your own personal heebie-jeebies. And so, I don't know. I didn't really like anything that she had a part of. I think she was, like, okay in the beginning of it, like, being introduced and whatever. But her character is lame. I don't know. I just don't, like... One of the things, like, the whole reason Elphaba goes to this school is to practice with this professor, but then you only see her with this professor twice. And one of them is, oh, hey, I'm evil, just so you know, but you don't know. Like, it's only twice that she's really in this trying to help Elphaba. And so I'm like, okay, so you're useless in the grand scheme of things. The other one is, I think, the wizard is just lame, but that's another just personal preference. Anyways. So, a not concrete 7.
Yeah. To be fair to what you're saying, in this later iteration of his career, Jeff Goldblum's forever appeared to me as Grandmaster from Thor. Like, every role he's in feels like that same vibe to me.
Yeah.
Down to, like, the being a phony leader of, like, a nation. Every time I feel like... Even when he's on those blastedApartments.com commercials, like, it always feels like that to me. But anyway, Jonah, what do you have to say for us?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, Ryder, I think you make an excellent point when it comes to the whole, looking at the original Wizard of Oz source material, what those characters represented, and then you're brought into this world where they kind of don't use those characters for that original intent of what they were meant for. I never really thought about it like that until you mentioned that, and I think that's a great idea. And going along with the set examples that you have, it's like, if we looked at like Civil War, and we obviously know that Captain America is the bad guy,
yeah.
but say they did a film where, it's like, well, actually, no, Captain America is a good guy,
Sure.
which no one would believe.
Right.
But can you imagine? Like that would piss me off. I mean, I think we can all agree.
Me
with
and you
that.
are gonna have some words later. We're gonna have a round three.
But I mean, what I think, jokes aside, I think you do see kind of more of what you're talking about, Ryder, in the universe of Star Wars, specifically with the Acolyte. They take these preconceived, pre-established ideas about the Force and who's this guy and who's good and who's bad, and then they kind of like, you know, for as long as we've known, we've rested on this. This is what's this. And then somebody comes along and says, well, actually, you know, the Force isn't really the Force. And you're like, okay, who's this guy? Who invited this guy to the party?
Yes.
And get him out of here. It's like, it's essentially having a sleepover with a guy who, once it hits 12 a.m., he's like, well, technically it's actually today instead of tomorrow. And it's like, okay, get this guy out of here. I don't care.
Yeah.
It's hands on sight, basically. So, but I think I do see the Wicked universe as its kind of separate universe, like you're saying. And for me, it doesn't bother me as much, but I do agree with what you're saying, and I think there's some really good symbolism in the original Wizard of Oz that does kind of get thrown out with this movie, and I think that is understandable to me. But again, someone who has seen the play and is well established with, I'll say this universe, because it is separate from the Wizard of Oz in my eyes. I think every character plays their part really well. In fact, honestly, Cynthia Erivo, I think, was born to play Elphaba, more so than the original actress who played her on Broadway, and I think it's just incredible. I would still, again, for the role of Glinda, I would have chosen Dove Cameron, but Ariana Grande does do a phenomenal performance. Jaden might hate me for this, I really love the Prince's character.
I agree with
and
you.
his
I think he's the odd man out here. So.
Yeah.
Look. I mean, I just have a couple problems with it. Okay, leave me alone.
Okay, that's it. Yeah. But no, I think the chemistry between him and Ariana Grande or Glinda, you know, is really, really well and tangible, and it's obvious. And he plays exactly the character that he's supposed to play. I think Jeff Goldblum as the wizard, ironically, like it works for me. I don't know why, but I think it's funny, but he plays it well enough to where he's not like, oh yes, oh okay, it's like, no, you're playing it straight. I can appreciate that. Yeah. I would probably rate the characters as a 9. I'm really impressed with what they represent in this movie and who they got to play these characters in this movie. I think that was one of the strong suits of the movie adaptation of this universe.
And to echo what you're saying, and one thing that I did want to make a note of to say when discussing the character aspect here was the acting performances, and I will agree with you. I think across the board, they're fairly phenomenal. You know, you can I can always nitpick a few things here and there and like fan cast my votes for like who I would love to see, and there certainly are a few of those where there's different people I would love to see give certain roles a try. As well, but overall, like particularly with the Ariana Grande casting, like you, it was one for me that I was like, we'll see how it ends up. You know, she doesn't really strike me as the Glinda the Good type,
right?
But
right.
Coming away from this movie, I do really feel like, as far as her acting career, at least, it's really reinvented her for me as an actress to see her in a role like that, and it's like, oh wow, we're not just, you know, back in the Nickelodeon days anymore that I grew up on her acting career from. But across the board, I really did like the acting performances. But to round out overall here, just kind of the general enjoyment we got from the movie, replay value, if you want to call it that, or just overall how much we liked it. I will say for me, I'm not really one for musicals. La La Land really is kind of the exception in that, where I really don't love a whole lot of musicals. Like Greatest Showman for me personally, I never really got the hype on that one. And others across the board, it's kind of standard for how I feel. But I did find myself really enjoying this film. It was fun. It was engaging. It was like, not that I was on the edge of my seat because I was like scared, but I was just like entertained the whole time I was watching it, which I really liked. And it's hard to get a movie like that nowadays, it feels like.
What'd you give it?
I gave it a 7. Sorry, I didn't say that.
So I give it a 9. It would be a 10, but I feel like a 10 is like, I can literally play this whenever in any mood.
Sure.
But it's not quite that level. I enjoy musicals much more than Ryder does. But this one, even without seeing the movie, this was my favorite musical. Like, it was always played for us. Like, it's that nostalgic for us. So now being able to see the fullness of at least this representation in this movie, like without the play, seeing it full-fledged and like listening to the soundtrack with it, like, this is gonna sound corny, but like it like that was the missing piece of like the puzzle in my head for like this, like, I don't know, it felt fulfilling. It was very entertaining. Absolutely loved it. Could throw this on next week. I don't think it's something I'd get tired with if I'm not watching it like every single day, like, but I could almost turn it on just about whenever. That's how I feel about it, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd have to agree with Jaden. I put a 9 too. And I agree too. I couldn't watch this every day, but if I had, $1 billion, I would definitely have seen this movie in theaters probably 2 more times, and found just as much enjoyment out of it the first time I watched it as I would the third time. So I'd place it at a 9. I really had a great time in theaters watching this. I probably, you know what? I'm sorry. They just came out with a sing-along version of this. I would not want to experience that.
That's not
where the entire theater of wannabe Broadway singers.
They all think they're Cynthia Erivo, and you're like,
yes.
Temper your expectations, guy.
I would be right.
Don't drop out of your computer science classes.
Yeah, please. Yeah. I would be the Simon Cowell of that entire movie theater. Love, you can't sing, right? You're just god awful. Shut your gobber, shove some popcorn in it, and shut your mouth, love. Yeah, I would defy gravity out of my seat and walk straight to the exit if I had to sit through an entire.
You'd pull out the animatronic Wizard of Oz head and shout at them with fire.
I would. I'd summon my army of monkeys on them and release unrelenting hellfire upon them.
Yeah.
I would be popular on the FBI most wanted list for most people massacred in a movie theater. That's what would happen. So a 9 is what I rated it.
It's great. What I will say is I have seen it twice in theaters. I went once with my family, and then J-Mac hadn't seen it and was trying to like be cool guy and go see it alone. And I was like, no, dude, I'll just go with you.
To be cool guy, just didn't care.
Yeah. So hold up to that one. I will say, personally, I enjoyed it more the second time going through it. Mostly because at that point I was like, let me just like give this a fresh, it's original, it's its own thing. Let me not attach this to the Wizard of Oz. And then I like really loved it a lot more.
Sure.
But anyways, overall for me, the movie came out to a 7.5 out of 10. pretty close to like how I would say I feel about it. I haven't seen a whole ton of films that came out last year, but it is like one of the top 3 or 4 or 5 that I did see last year.
Yeah. Mine came out to an 8.1. Could go higher. I feel like if I did watch it a second time too, like,
yeah,
I think I'd enjoy it even more. So it could definitely be higher.
Yeah.
There you go.
For now, 8.1 seems cool.
Yeah. Yeah, mine came out to an 8.5. If I had to round it up or down, that's a tough call. I could go a 9. I would feel comfortable with an 8, though. It's not like groundbreaking cinema, but I genuinely had a great time, which is saying something looking at movies and their releases recently.
Yeah.
I think it was my number 2 for the whole year.
Wow.
Dune 2 obviously taking number 1.
Right.
But yeah, no, solid time. I think 8.5 for me is a solid rating for this movie.
Sure.
So
yeah, one thing that I will like finalize my thoughts on it saying is I've seen a lot of people that kind of have this idea of like it's the best movie of the year, if not the best movie they've ever seen lately. And all I can say to that is that like some people, what I will say, some people, it's like seeing their childhood come to life on a screen, and like that makes them so happy. But like we can still call a spade a spade. I can still see the Justice League movie and be stoked to see all my favorite childhood characters come together and realize that the movie kind of sucks. No, this one doesn't suck, but like we can temper our expectations is what I'll say. But it's a good movie. I enjoyed it. Not the best thing I've ever seen, but it's a good one.
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, I could totally agree with that.
Yeah. Any final thoughts anyone has before we wrap up Wicked here?
Yeah, you guys are way more in depth with like catching movie things than I am. And I usually just sit here and listen and I'm like, wow, like I could have watched this movie 15 times and not caught one of those things that y'all have said. So now I kind of hate you both. So there's that. I don't like how in depth you guys can get with this. I'm just watching his gears turn, and he's making connections. Like, oh yeah, like now that you say that, like I do remember that, and I can connect this with that, and that with that, and I'm like, pink and green, So
They go well together.
It's kind of nice.
Yeah.
Cool broomstick.
Kind of nice. Yeah.
Anyway,
That's a Nimbus
Yeah,
2000.
Anyways.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this whole movie has from a what do you even call it? It just has turned into this like giant cult.
Yeah.
And I'm not digging that part.
Yeah.
I'm like they're like Ariana Grande is God. And I'm like, no, sweetie.
Chill out.
No, sweetie. Chill out.
You talking about that person from Victorious?
Yeah, no, sweetie. But it's a good movie. I love it.
Yeah.
I dig it. I'm with it. I appreciate it. It's a good movie. But
Yeah,
y'all need to
100%,
chill with this, like, Cynthia Erivo could never fail. And I'm like, well,
You never know.
That's not true, actually. False about that. So, yeah.
Wicked fans saw the Barbie cult from last year and pulled out the JPEG Mafia lyric where he says, if I was an NBA player, I'd be Dylan Brooks, but worse. And they said, if I was a movie fan, I'd be Barbie fans, but worse.
said, hold me.
They said, here, hold this.
Hold my beer. It's like I felt like it was the same energy of like a Swiftie.
Oh,
like
yeah,
a
yeah,
Taylor
yeah.
Swift
Yeah.
fan.
Speaking of
That's just, yeah.
Thumbs
Yeah,
down.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I hate to bring it up.
You ruined that
but
episode.
I also love to bring it up.
Well,
Yeah.
Jonah,
Sorry.
it's only fair that we wrap up that segment this way because Taylor Swift inevitably comes into our episodes at least like every 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And it's purely on like
Yeah,
us being sassy about it.
Yeah.
sure.
But Jonah, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to dive into Gladiator 2 in just a minute here. But we're always happy to have you on, and we hopefully we'll look forward to having you back on another one here soon.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate, again, every time I'm on and every time we get to do something together, I'm always looking forward to it. So thank you so much.
All righty.
Yeah.
We'll catch you later.
All righty. All right, man.
See you.
Bye. Well, Jonah, I mean, he's not here anymore, but we're always glad that he's able to join us. But let's get into Gladiator II here.
Yeah.
Another big blockbuster on the year. I made a joke when I walked out of Wicked, and I said, that was good, but Gladiator 2's trailer was better than that. And it wasn't a slight at Wicked. It was just that trailer, I saw that, and I was like, oh, okay, that might be crazy.
You showed me, you said, dude, there's sharks.
There were sharks. That's not a spoiler, by the way. That's in the trailer.
It's not.
But yeah, I was really excited to see what they would do with this one. Gladiator 1, one of my favorite movies of all time, one of the best movies of all time. You said something to me when we watched the first one the other day to get ready for this movie.
Yeah.
That you said they just don't make movies like they used to. And I'll echo that and also say they don't make lead characters like they used to.
100%.
Following Maximus and his journey is just incredible. Even the villain that they create with Commodus, Joaquin Phoenix, is just also really, really interesting in his own ways. But yeah, I was really stoked to go in and see this one. Overall, it doesn't live up to the hype. You know, before we get into spoilers here,
Right.
like it's not the first Gladiator. You're not going to walk out of there with a different perception of cinema after seeing it.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun. It's a great watch. It's like one of those where you just sit back and you're like, crazy. Like this is fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's aspects I like, aspects I don't like. Overall, it is worth a watch. I would say particularly on a big screen if you have the ability to see it on that kind of grand scale. But yeah, spoiler free. How'd you feel?
Yeah, if you can watch it, definitely watch it on time.
Oh my gosh!
We watched it.
We walked in when the movie started on the start time online.
Right.
But it started a half hour early.
Right. So we missed like a good 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So that's how our viewing experience was.
Yeah.
Granted, still walked away from the movie understanding just about everything except
what we needed to at least.
Right.
Yeah.
Piggyback, they don't make movies, they don't make these characters like they used to. You showed me the first Gladiator, what, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
I remember walking out of the theater of Gladiator 2 really sad, thinking like, wow, they really don't make movies like they used to. And that's not a slight at this movie. It is a really good movie. It's just, you watch the first one, this dialogue, like you're truly invested in Maximus, and like, bro is doing this all on his own. He got everything taken from him, and like now he's starting at ground zero and is able to basically build this army of gladiators, and like, it's just beautiful cinema.
Yeah.
This one, less super great dialogue, more cool action, cool scenes, fighting, all that. So, pros and cons.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said there. Overall, I think we both did still enjoy it, despite the fact that we don't feel like it's quite what the first one was by any stretch.
Yeah.
But, I mean, if you haven't seen Gladiator 2, here's your warning that spoilers might be coming up here. Moving into the plot specifically, this particularly was where I really felt at least one of the areas where I really felt like they weren't able to live up to the original, and it was because so much of the plot felt like it was borrowed from the original. Yeah. Let's take this guy who should be a leader, should have everything that he wants, he's doing all the right things, and just everything's taken from him. He's taken in as a slave.
Right.
He has to become a gladiator to fight for the wealthy elites that he once was among. And, you know, that whole aspect does remind me a lot of the first movie, but without any of the originality that made the first one so interesting and so compelling to follow. And then obviously there's character aspects and dialogue aspects to that I'll get into a little bit later here. But it was still interesting, thought-provoking. I felt like it was cool to kind of look at and feel like I could draw a lot of parallels to what the filmmakers were trying to convey about society and the world as a whole in Roman times versus now as well, and being able to kind of feel what I feel like maybe Ridley Scott, the director, and the other filmmakers were trying to tell us a little bit about our society as opposed to how the world worked in ancient Rome. Particularly talking, I mean, obviously you're watching that movie and you may not at face value feel like, oh, we're kind of the same, We also watch slaves fight each other to the death with swords. No, not quite, but we do have our kind of class system where certain people look down on other people just because of circumstance and kind of vie for the entertainment and support of the wealthy, who really are just kind of self-absorbed. Anyways, there's a lot of layers that you could look into that way, and so it was kind of interesting to watch that movie and feel that way a little bit about why that movie was made at kind of this stage 20 some odd years later.
Yeah.
But yeah, not overly reinventive or overly inventive and new. It was just kind of another iteration of and another development of the first plot that we got.
Yeah, would you give it?
7.
Cool. So I agree. 7. Basically, same thing minus the deep aspect. But I think of it as take Maximus out. It's the exact same movie with sharks, like more or less.
Yeah.
Like
sure.
it's just another action movie with a lot of violence.
Yeah.
Granted, like the story's not bad. Even though it's a borrowed story, for the most part, some differences. It's still like a solid story minus Maximus. Like
no, you still feel invested as you're watching it.
Exactly. Yeah. Like you're. I believe the character's name is Lucius.
Yeah.
I'm not as invested in him as I was Maximus, but let's just take the first Gladiator out. Lucius is a dope character.
Yeah, cool.
If Gladiator didn't exist, I probably excuse me. If Maximus didn't exist, I would probably enjoy and feel better about Lucius as a character. But because it is a 20-year later movie, it kind of takes a hit. But granted, it is still a good plot. It's still a good movie. It has its differences. Like Denzel's character,
like
that was I think the
kind
biggest,
of a new iteration,
right?
Yeah.
So that part was cool. I like that little switch up. I like their little face off. I thought that was a good.
Yeah, 100%. And last thing I'll say about the plot is, I have seen some people just out there saying like, this isn't what ancient Rome was like. Like this is not historically accurate. And if you're walking into Gladiator trying to learn Roman history, you need help in other areas of your life. Like
history is the least of your concerns.
That is not what you're walking into Gladiator interested in seeing. Are you walking in seeing what life could have been like back then? What aspects of how people may have lived? Right. Sure, that's interesting. It's seeing a different world. Yeah, absolutely, that's interesting. But like, we're not here like we are with Oppenheimer to get someone's life story.
Yeah, no.
Walking into that, you should know walking into that movie what you're going into it trying to see.
Yeah.
Anyways,
that's ridiculous.
Yeah. Moving into the writing, this was one of the aspects of the first film where, there's quite a few 10s on my list in categories for the first film.
Yeah.
This one's absolutely one of them. The writing is just such a fantastic, interesting part. Their dialogue and exchanges are so compelling and thought-provoking, and it's just like That's like one of the greatest quotes I've heard, and like, how has nobody said it that way before? When you're in the first movie, you know what I'm saying?
Wait, what? What did you just say to me? I said, just say it again.
I said the dialogue in the first movie is really great and really thought-provoking and compelling. Okay. And you hear quotes and you're like, that's one of the greatest quotes I've ever heard in a movie.
I didn't hear you say in the first movie, so I'm thinking like, I'm trying to think of a single time I felt that way in the second one.
No. Just setting the stage for my point here, which was to say, it's not that good.
Yeah.
So we're on the same page.
Yeah, I heard your entire build up.
It's not as strong as the first one, but there are still a few solid moments of dialogue, creating kind of those thoughtful interactions and moments. Particularly one that kind of resonated with me and stuck with me is when Lucius fights Pedro Pascal's character, the general.
Yeah.
And they're kind of having this back and forth while they're fighting because Lucius doesn't really realize who Pedro Pascal's character is and that he's actually someone trying to help him.
Right.
That exchange is really interesting. And then as he dies and Lucius is like, is this how Rome treats its heroes? And like shouts that at the crowd. I was like, okay, that feels like the first Gladiator again. Like I get that similar feeling. But yeah, I did give the writing an 8. It wasn't flawless. It certainly wasn't as strong as the first one. But there were still some cool moments where I was like interested in what characters were saying.
Yeah. I think it was a terrible idea to see the first one so closely to the second one. Because I feel like I'm a lot harder on it.
Yeah. Well, and that's the nature.
Just how it is.
Yeah.
I give it a 7. I do like some of the dialogue between certain characters like Lucius and the medic in the Gladiator. Mm-hmm. I think their relationship was cool. I liked another one of the scenes. It was a little more slight, but the last thing he says to the medic, like, give this ring, like, I am the prince. Like, I was kind of like, oh, now he's coming out like, you know,
right.
And then the other time I felt that way was when he's rallying the other gladiators together and really shows the leader in him. But other than that, like, it's not the first one, and I know it's trying not to be. Like, I know it's supposed to be its own thing. This is 20 years later. But, it, like, I should have watched it a little bit earlier.
Spaced out a little
bit. Yeah. But, I mean, I feel like 7's still a respectable number.
Sure. It's clear that it's not the first one, and being a sequel, it is one of those things where you're going to be a little bit harder on it because it comes after an original that you really like.
Right.
Moving into the next category here to talk about the visuals a little bit. This was one of my favorite parts of the movie. It is nearly a 10, but it's actually an 8 for me. And I'll get into why. Just for 99% of the movie, the visuals are stunning, brilliant, entertaining, and you see these things on the screen that you're like, earlier in our episode, Jonah talked about Dune 2, and there's moments that I feel the way I did about Dune 2, where I see things and I'm like, the way they captured that is fantastic. And I feel that way about this movie a lot of the time. The only reason it's an 8 is the CGI at moments is really bad, particularly because the first movie doesn't rely on a whole lot of CGI to achieve such brilliant visuals.
Yeah.
But like the scene with the sharks could have been so cool. Oh, yeah. Could have been so cool. And then you get a little bit of like the Shark Boy and Lava Girl shark feel from it, where it's like, did they animate this in 2004?
Pulled it out of the vault.
Yeah, like hold on. I think Shark Boy and Lava Girl has this footage. Let's just call them up. That was really like the only bad part was there was a couple of CGI moments where I just felt like that feels out of place.
Yeah.
But like aside from those few moments, it's nearly flawless outside of that to me.
Yeah, this is going to be the easiest one because yes.
Yeah.
Same rating, same reasoning. The CGI sucked.
Yeah. Other than that, great.
It's solid.
Moving on then.
Next one.
Talking about the audio, I gave this section a 7, partly because we're coming off of Wicked right after it, you know, and so like just compared to that, the score isn't bad per se. Like it's interesting. I thought the sound mixing and special effects for all of the fights and everything were interesting and cool to hear. But and also sandwiching that with, we also just watched Gladiator 1, which has such a fantastic score. Going into this one, you're like, oh, well, it's just not. It's not quite the way that first one just adds to the moments.
Yeah.
I gave it a 7. It still fits the tone of the movie. It adds to the good moments, but it's just not that mind blowing, awesome, epic sound of the first film.
Yeah. So with me, I also gave it a 7. Not only for the reasoning of where that movie was placed when we watched it, but when we were talking about Wicked, I gave the audio, I think, a 9.
Sure.
Like super high. I don't usually give audio like that much credit,
Yeah.
but it's mainly because I don't hear the score, or it's not that prominent to where I'm feeling anything.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, this is building for me. Like,
Yeah.
it's just not something that I'm paying attention to.
Right.
And so that's where it kind of takes a hit for me. It's not a movie where I'm hearing it all that well. It's not super prominent. It's just It's just kind of that background music, which I know it's supposed to be, but you know.
Yeah. I do feel like the great film scores have a way of sticking with you and have a way of standing out while still serving their role as kind of that secondary element to the movie. You know what I mean? Like, you hear Jurassic Park, the soundtrack, and you see it in the movie, and you're like, holy crap, that's a fantastic score.
Yeah.
But it's not like it's overpowering the scene that it's in. It's like you're watching the movie and you're like, holy crap, the music makes this scene fantastic.
Yes, exactly.
So I agree with you wholeheartedly.
I feel the same with Star Wars, Harry Potter.
Sure.
These big franchises, they've learned and they mastered it. Like, if more films were able to give you, because music, I feel like it's not utilized enough, and I'm not talking the soundtrack. Like, these scores, like Hans Zimmerman, right? That's his name?
Mm-hmm.
Nails it every time.
Yeah.
It's because music just adds on to such a big emotion that, like, we are subconsciously feeling.
Yeah.
And it just makes a movie that much better. And so, like, that's why I will dock a movie, depending the movie, but I'll dock it hard enough if I feel like it doesn't really help it in any sense.
Yeah. Interestingly, for your case, Hans Zimmer did the first Gladiator movie, but not the second one. So there you go.
Bingo!
Yeah.
What's his name?
Hans Zimmer?
Oh, so I did not say his name right.
What'd you say?
Zimmerman.
Oh, yeah. Wait. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Zimmer.
You made me second guess everything. Like, question my whole life right now.
I'm terrible with names.
Going into the characters here, though, we talked earlier, I said earlier, they don't quite make characters like they used to. That's still true, but overall, I did feel like these were solid characters. They provide great arcs for the characters, especially those previously established, where it felt like maybe at the end of the first one there was some unresolved storyline directions with Lucius's mother, and you get a lot more of that conclusion there in her story, or at least you get it more fleshed out to see where she's come from and where she ends up. It's just generally not as compelling as the original. Watching Lucius go through everything he went through and ending up where he ends up. That's not to say it's not good, but like, even to your point earlier where you said, like, I'd probably be a lot more invested in Lucius and his story if I hadn't just seen the original Gladiator. I will just disagree a little bit. I feel like watching their two arcs, Lucius's character arc just isn't as compelling and interesting as how they set up Maximus's arc in the first one. Maybe seeing the first 30 minutes of Gladiator 2 helps with that. I don't know.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be able to tell you. But yeah, overall, Denzel Washington's character was also very interesting. The emperors were like also interesting and creepy and crazy in their own ways. Not nearly as impactful as Joaquin Phoenix's performance, I'll remind you, but still good in their own ways. And then as well as the medic, I liked his character as well. So I gave it an 8.
Yeah, so I gave it an 8 too, but I do have a very high respect for this part of the film. Like, the characters themselves might be my favorite because they don't have the same effect on me as Gladiator 1 with Maximus and
Commodus.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But Lucius is still this dope character. Like, even if I just don't think like, okay, he's Gladiator. Like, if I just put all of that aside and I just think Lucius, like, what are you doing as a character? Like, he's dope. He's this calm, level-headed, but like he'll still put up a fight. A little bit different than Maximus. He would just take a beating and he'd just do whatever you want. I don't care. Yeah. But Lucius a little different, so I appreciated that. Is it crazy? I know it is. I already know the answer. But I think this is the first time I've seen Denzel Washington in a movie.
Yeah, that is crazy.
Yeah, like really crazy.
Yeah, so, really crazy.
Yeah. I might be wrong. Not 100% sure. But it might be another Ryan Gosling situation, except reverse. This was great.
He's great.
Rather than...
So, yeah, you're on the right track.
Okay, cool. Rather than the first time I saw Ryan. Won't get into it.
You could go watch another great movie that they're both in with Remember the Titans.
They're both in that? Oh. I'll get there. I think, me personally, he was my favorite character.
Yeah, I agree.
Lucius is, like, right there, but Denzel just absolutely kills it. I like that he has this own agenda, but he doesn't show it off as immediate as like the professor is, I feel. I like his whole build up. I was rooting with him at first, but then he turns out he's not a good guy and overthrows the emperors. Crazy dude. Yeah. Great. He absolutely killed his performance. Piggyback on the emperors. Yeah. They're weirdos, they're psychos, they're scary. Yeah. Killed their parts. They did what they needed to do. Yeah, for sure. But that I did enjoy that portion of the film.
I don't know if I mentioned also, I really like Pedro Pascal's performance and character as well. I think I brought up him at an earlier point, but overall solid work on the characters there. Moving into the enjoyability of the movie, talking about again just how much we enjoyed the movie-going experience. Aside from missing the first 30 minutes.
Right.
I really liked it. It was fun. It was an exciting addition and installment to like one of the great movie franchises. There's times you can walk away from sequels just being like, why'd they have to do that to the original? Like, why put this out? It's just terrible. It doesn't fit with it. I didn't feel that way at all about this one. Even though I walked away feeling like, okay, that's certainly not the first one. I still walked away feeling like that was a lot of fun. Yeah. Looked great. Things were well executed. Money well spent to go see that movie is how I really felt. So I gave it an 8.
Cool. Gave it a 7, a little bit lower.
Sure.
But that's strictly due to the fact that I just watched the first Gladiator not too long. But nonetheless, I fully agree. It was fun to go watch. It's not one that I'm just going to throw on. But
because you have the first one if you ever did want to.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that one. Oh.
We should watch it. We're going to watch that again after this.
Yeah.
After this episode.
Dude, I just got like images of it.
Chills.
Yeah. Chills. Yeah. Anyways, still a solid movie.
Sure. So overall for me it was a 7.6 out of 10. How did it run for you?
I'm right below you, 7.5.
Okay.
So
I mean, score-wise, Wicked easily takes cake for you here.
Oh.
You vastly prefer this one, or Wicked over Gladiator.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And it's not Gladiator 2's fault. I'll say that. Sure. It's nostalgic and Gladiator 1's fault.
Okay. Yeah.
Strict.
Yeah. Fair enough. And I really can't knock it. Mine, the scores are pretty reflective. It's 0.1 difference in favor of Gladiator 2.
Yeah.
And really what it comes down to is it's just a difference in my personal preference
Right.
of enjoyment.
Yeah.
And Gladiator 2 is more the style of movie that, like, I get more out of when I'm
Right.
watching it. Not to say that, like, I'm a warmonger and just like watching war, but, like, when there's a more serious overture and tone to the movie, I feel myself taking it a little more seriously and enjoying it a little bit more because of that.
It's crazy that a musical got that close to something like a Gladiator 2. It's cool to see.
For me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, even though, like, Wicked isn't personally my favorite,
Right.
I also would say that about Gladiator 2. Like, there's plenty of movies I'd rather watch before
100%.
Gladiator 2 again, but it is just one that I,
Right.
they're both great in
Yeah.
their own ways, and I enjoy them because of that. So,
I agree.
well, if you're still here, thanks for listening all the way in. We're sorry for taking so long.
Yeah, this was a long one.
It was a long one, but time well spent to see both of these movies if you do have the
100%.
chance. 2025, it's a big year. Same me, though.
It might be one of the greatest quotes of all time. See ya.